Hi everybody, I'm Cecily V. Thanks for checking out my video here. I'm going to go over some information about reflected light today. So what I've done here is started in Photoshop with just a still life with some basic block forms that I set up. And then I went ahead and made a sketch out of it. So this is the sketch. Just basically like a trace sketch, kept it pretty simple, similar local colors and same lighting. And then I created a couple of objects, starting with this white ball. And I want to walk you through how the light behaves so that it bounces from the light source to the other objects around it, and how it bounces from the light source to the ground plane and back up into the form shadow here. So first things first, we get our fresh empty layer here, and I like to give myself a guide for the direction of the light. So I usually make some really funky light direction lines like this to give myself an idea. And then I come back over here and I'm going to take a soft brush, and first we can do the light reflecting from the light source to the ground plane. And the thing to remember is that the light is 100% strong at the source, but when it bounces it loses a lot of strength. I think it's something like 90% of its strength is lost, 90% of its intensity is lost once it starts bouncing around. So with the light going from here to here and then bouncing back roughly at if you take like this, roughly at a 45-degree angle, it's going to hit right around down in here in this bottom form shadow area. So we're just basically taking the mixture between the ground plane color, which is just this gray here, and the gray of this shadow form on the ball here. So you can see on the color picker over here that this is the ground plane gray, and then here's the gray for the shadow. So just gonna take what's in between those two, and that's gonna give us a good enough tone for the reflected light here that bounces back. So we're gonna go, it's coming down, bounce, bonk, and just start painting a little bit in there. Now it's super helpful to do these kind of light study practice exercises in Photoshop or Painter or any digital program, because it's a lot more forgiving and easier to learn in those softwares than when you do it traditionally with acrylics or oils. Of course you can do that, but it's a lot less forgiving, and it involves a lot of color mixing, which is a totally different thing than what's going on with the fundamentals of light and the behavior of light. That's more of a pigment thing, and having to know which different colors are coming together to make the pigment you're using. It's even a little bit separated from color theory, just because, not a lot, but it's just a little bit, because you're dealing with pigment. Okay, so there's our little indication of bounce light, and that is pretty good. Make this a little bit bigger here. Might be a little bit bright, so we can always knock it back. So I'll just pick some from the shadow here and come in and knock that back. And you can control click your object, the layer of your object, to get a selection of just that. That way it won't go outside of what you're trying to paint. So I will make this a little bit, there we go. a little bit. Okay, so we've got our bounce light. Trying to make sure it's not too strong. And so now we've got our little bit of reflected light there. So that's light source, ground plane, bounce, boom, there we go. So to get the reflected light from here to here, it's the same idea. It's just that the light is bouncing from the source. Same sort of 45-degree angle thing. So if I was to let's just take a really bright color here. So basically, the idea is kind of that it's coming from the light source, and it's gonna go boom, and it's gonna bounce on this back end that we can't see, and then go like that, and end up right around in this area, okay? So, and then we're still taking this local color, sort of somewhere in the halftone, and the shadow tone here, and blending it with this sort of halftone of this off-white object. So if you take this off-white object, you can really just take the color of the object and bounce in that area. So I'm going to take a selection that I created for these blocks so that the light stays right where I want it. So I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, and I'm just going to go very soft. I'm not changing the opacity or anything, but it's going to go bounce, bounce. And it's not going to go too high because this ball only goes like there, okay, on height. So I actually need my softer brush. And so it's going to come down on here and bounce right around here, and it's probably not going to really go any higher than this area here. So I just start putting in the area of the reflected light there. And if you go a little too strong, you can always look here in your navigator to check on that. Start going a little too strong, that's fine. Like I can totally go way too dark, way too bright, right? Just to give myself the shape. And say, okay, that's roughly about what it's gonna be. That's where that reflected light is gonna live, right? And then I'll just go ahead and select my shadow color from this form and knock it back. So that I'll knock the whole thing back so that it's not that bright. I'm just checking over here. Now, if this object was reflective rather than Lambertian, so it's a textured regular object, it's not glass-like, it's not metal, it's nothing that's specular or mirror-like, so it's not going to be extra bright when the light hits it, which is why you lose so much of the light. It's getting absorbed, right, and then some of it's getting bounced back. If this was a highly reflective surface, this reflected light would be different. Much brighter, most likely, and also then you would be having reflections on the object. But since it's not reflective, and we're not doing that kind of thing today, you just get this very subtle bounce light here. And I can probably take this up just a little bit, and I'll knock that back. I'll do 60% there. So what I did there was I put some more reflection in there, reflected light in there, and then I used Control-Shift-F to fade it so that I could knock back the mark that I just made. And that's about it. So when we turn this layer on and off, you see the difference. Let me turn off the light source for a second. So see, it starts to add a bit more depth on both objects. The about the ball shape and the cylinder. Now light is gonna bounce around a little bit over here, so we'll probably get a little bit of reflected light on this cylinder on this cone from the cylinder, and on the cone on this side from the cube. And then there's probably a little bit of reflected light happening from the ball onto the cone, but probably not going to be able to see very much of it because the ball's kind of in the way. So we can just take that same middle tone color there, white, and we could do I think we'll change our selection here. We can go a little bit back here. Oops, sorry. Control Shift I to invert the selection. And just get a little bit of light there. And that'll probably be it, because it is a little bit further from the cone than it is from the cylinder and the cube. Now the cylinder and the cone, and then the cone and the cube are relatively close. So the light is going to bounce around in there and hit, so we can take our closer to our local color of these shapes, and we'll reload our blocks so that we stay in here and we don't have to clean up later to do. And I'll go ahead and put the reflected light from the cylinder onto this side here. Alright, see, that brightens up the shadows a good bit. And then we can always knock it back, so same thing over here. Light is coming here and hitting this face here that we can't see. So let's go ahead and do it like this. There's a face here that's going to come down like this. So we've got a square face here that we can't see. The light is going to come here and boom, boom, and hit from here to here and be on this side here. So we'll get the same sort of middle tone there, come up the side. Now it's not going to bounce higher than the object, so it's coming down, and it's probably going to stay just down in this area there. And it'll be a little brighter the closer it gets to the objects get to each other. And probably should knock that back just a little bit, because it's a little too bright down here. A little too bright down here. So now we can turn off the light source and turn off this on and off. So you see how much brighter reflected light makes the shadows? So it makes a big difference as far as giving a sense of, I'll probably knock this back just a little bit, but it gives a pretty good sense of objects being near each other. And you can include your reflected light there. Okay, so we take off our selections. That is our reflected light for the white ball object. Go ahead and save. Save early and often so that you don't lose minutes or hours worth of work. So the other thing I've done is to create this demo in such a way that you get the idea from a basic white form with the white ball, but then also some colored objects. Now this red ball, and then there's a blue ball. And I did that because this red ball is going to be, if we take off the shading, it's this level of red. So it's all the way over here on the hue, saturation, brightness scale. So it's way over here on this end. And then the blue ball is down here. So with the white, we had a very bright object, and then the red is a little bit bright but colored, and then this one is more of a middle of the road type of darker mid-tone, because that affects the bounce light or the reflected light. So we can go ahead and do our reflected light for the red ball, and it's the same process. It doesn't change at all. I'm gonna take this gray color here. It's the light. Oops, there we go. The light bouncing from the source to the ground plane back up in that same spot. So we'll just take this gray, and the red was over here, so we'll just kind of go in the middle. And it's going to be very subtle. And again, to get it in there so you can see it, you can make it way brighter than it needs to be. And then put your shadow tone here. And just knock it back. Alright. So see, we've got our reflected light, still probably a little too bright. So we'll keep knocking it back a little bit. Oops, wrong one. It's still a bit much, I think. It's a little large. Make it a little darker here. That's gotten a little wonky there, isn't it? Okay, so that's okay. So we've got light coming, light source, boom, boom. Might spread this just a little bit. Alright, so now we've got our reflected light. Got a little wonky with the shadow shape. And that can always be cleaned up. You can always just clean it up a little bit there. Clean up the blending. And we're good. Okay, so we've got the same thing, reflected lights there. And we'll do the bounce light. Now this bounce light is, you know, it's got a color to it. It's got this red tone here. Alright, we get like a middle tone. And it's going to bounce the same way as the other one, but now you have to take the red into consideration here with this local shadow color on the cylinder. So I'm going to go to the selection. Takes down on cleanup later. And same type of thing. It's going to be in the same spot, but now it's going to be that red. And we might need to, since it's blending with the light and the light is white, take this up a little bit closer to the white. You see how it's starting to come there, and it's still very subtle. Make it a little bit more closer, and that should just about do it actually, and we'll knock it back a little bit. And that's about it. That's your reflected lights. Very subtle, again, because this is not a reflective object. So it's the same process for if there's going to be any of this reflected red light on the cylinder, and there won't be any on the cube because the light can only bounce, it's going to bounce this way off of the ground plane and off of the object. It's not going to bounce, well, it'll probably bounce this way, but it's going to bounce off into the air and not going to hit this object here unless it was super close and positioned a little differently. Like if the corner was right up against this red ball, then you would get some red on the corner. But it's not really in the right position here to get any of that red. So I'll show you the reflected light one more time just with the blue ball. And we're only going to do just the reflected light over here. Just a little bit of redundancy to help make sure it's clear. So I'm just going to take this sort of middle tone here and take into account that it's mixing with the light before it bounces over onto this object. So I'm just going to bring this up a little bit. And you see how much more subtle this is because of how much darker a tone the blue is. So it's not as bright as the red was. Definitely not as bright as the white. So we can make it a little bit darker on this corner here. And then that's about as far as you're gonna go, and then we gotta knock it back a bit, especially further out. And it's very, very subtle because of the different darker tone. Looks almost, actually it does start to get a little, starts to look a little purpley, even though it's not, it's like a mauve. And that's about it. I mean, you could argue that it would be a little darker, but that looks about right, I think. So that's about it, guys. I hope you guys found this helpful. Fundamentals of light can be challenging, but it's really important to learn. And bounce light, reflected light is going to be in most of the things that we paint and draw, so it's helpful to understand a bit of the nuance there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions for me, please leave it in the comment section below. And thanks for joining me. I hope you follow me on my blog or subscribe to my channel. That'd be awesome. You guys have a good day. Stay safe, take care, and happy drawing and painting. Bye.